thank you to all of our speakers for a series of fascinating talks going to the heart of some fundamental questions about the nature and function of culture and policy in an increasingly interconnected world. We have 15 minutes left for questions, and the first thing I will do is... You'll need a microphone, Stuart, to record them, because the others are all lapels.
Oh, okay.
But you're not.
Okay.
Everyone else has got their microphones on. Wonderful. We have the rare opportunity here of having 4 internationally renowned speakers who are interested in similar questions, but coming at them from very different perspectives. So I'd like to encourage questions from the floor, either to individual speakers or to the entire panel. But if anybody on the panel has thoughts or ideas in response to any of the questions, please butt in, because I'm really interested to hear how your perspectives interact with each other as well. I'd like to open the floor to questions, please.
I've got a question. No, go for it. I've spoken enough.
My question is about method, actually. I mean, one of the interesting things, I suppose, is the way, thinking about the ways in which methods kind of construct the object that they purport to measure, or how methods kind of manifest the reality that they claim to represent, I suppose. And like, just a couple of examples from the talks. I mean, Justin was talking about how Western creative cluster techniques, when applied to Shanghai, are trying to create a reality that does not, or cannot exist. And, Stuart mentioned the creative class, which is both a kind of a description, but it's also a kind of a construct. It's a kind of, it describes and it kind of enacts the world as well. So I was kind of curious as to the extent to which the series reflects on those issues around the relationship between kind of measuring something and kind of manifesting it, bringing it into being, bringing it into reality. And, Justin's right, I think, when he's talking about the need for a cultural economy of the cultural economy. And one of the things that wasn't really mentioned was the ways in which those issues around the role of method in constructing realities of cities, policy, government, and so on, are kind of explored in the context of the books. So that's the first question. And the second question really is, what are the panel's general views on that issue?
Well, I think that's a great question. I could jump in immediately by saying that is absolutely the implicit aim of this multi-perspectival approach that we've adopted. And what you'd find, I'm afraid I can't really cite chapter and verse right now, but what you find if you look at each volume is that not everybody in the volume is saying this, but you'll find a number of contributors who are actually taking apart a particular construct and saying, hey, from our vantage point, the discourse that seems to reign in the world today from a particular high point, and that high point from which the discourse is radiating just happens to be in North America and Western Europe, simply doesn't apply to our conditions. For example, in the third volume, the volume on cultural expression, creativity, and innovation, after the introduction, the first chapter is written by an Indian theatre scholar and theorist called Rustam Bharucha, who launches into a fairly violent attack of the Western notion of creativity and the cluster of concepts that have emerged in the neoliberal dispensation around the creative city and creative economy, creative da-da-da-da-da. So he's very consciously doing what you have advocated, and we have consciously sought out authors who would do that. In the same volume, though, you'll get a second chapter written by 2 American authors, and it doesn't occur to them to pose the question in that way. But that's part of the diversity, the ecumenism of the book, of each volume. They're never a volume of which bring together a single point of view, a single focus. This is a bunch of guys who really believe that this is what we should be saying.
Can I say something on that? It's a great question about how methods are performative. They produce their own object. And one thing I didn't say about the book that I did really love about it was that it has a militantly case study framework. So, and it doesn't look at the global city as a kind of monolithic term that you can just throw over everything. For me, it basically says each case study is the global city. Each case study speaks for the whole, in a sense. There is no whole. There's only this, incredible patterns of extraordinary difference, multiple dynamics going on in cities, and it's impossible to unify them in any sense. Each one is its own totality, I felt, and that was a great achievement, that you undid that kind of totalising logic of so many accounts of globalisation, which just sort of look at anything and say, oh, that's globalisation. That whole category is fractured in this book in a really productive way, and I think that's a great achievement. And it's because of a case study methodology, which I always think is fabulous. I mean, you can never account for everything. So why not just let the fragments speak for it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I think there are forces that are totalising, and I know exactly what you're saying. I agree with it, but there are, that work in any city. I know Shanghai very well, but that new construction of what a global city should do, what cultural industries, creative industries should do within it, they're being constructed. I mean, they're being constructed methodologically by economics. And economic, but to my mind, is a failed and dysfunctional science, because it's the tip of the iceberg behind Deloitte, what's the other one, Experian, all these huge companies, they're in first. You've got international arts agencies, which are absolutely part of the game in there. So there's some very big global intermediaries, if you like, coming in there and creating a very, it's not ideology, it's a real strong set of practices and frameworks, and it's very difficult for all those cities to say, "Oh, can we do something different?" I mean, that's the thing, and I think it's not so much methodology; it's a set of practices that's really quite strong, driven by these creative city discourses as well. So,
Stuart, do you have a comment?
No, I'd like to hear what people who've been listening for 70 minutes have got to say.
Andrew.
I get your point about the idea of moving away from a Western model of creativity, etc. Could I pose a model that's been looked at in your book? Say in the Middle East, well, you've got very different cultures, but in UAE they're doing the model just as what we talked about. They have an art fair in Ali, they'll have an offshoot of a very famous North American or European university there, so Stanford will be there, and then you'll have a tennis tournament, etc. So you have all these various different things. Now, at the same time, before the Arab Spring, most of those rulers, those countries were sort of saying, okay, we can have these bits, but we don't want all the other stuff, because in Sharjah there was a problem with a word in Ali. It was in a public space, it got banned, and there was censorship, and it was also against the thing of the Arab Spring. I think the Arab Spring grew up was that the autocratic rulers were saying, no, these are Western values, we're different, we have our traditions that are separate. And the population more or less saying, well, after you, we actually want those universal values and we're going to fight for them. So we want, right to vote, democracies, self-expression, that sort of stuff. So, you can sort of dump that model, but at the same time, it is one of those marginalising structures that is still informative and quite useful. Just like Arabic numbers are quite useful to us too.
Yeah, but point taken. I don't think we're on the... we were never in the series on the terrain of dissing Western values or Western perspectives. All that we were saying is that rather than have a set of volumes that are informed entirely by scholars who are living, who are from the West and are rooted there and naturally they are embedded in the disciplinary cant, and I'm using cant in Irving Goffman's sense, which is not necessarily depreciative. It just means the language of a corporate group, so that academics in a certain different discipline speak the same way. What we were trying to do is simply have perspectives from different parts of the world that were really perspectives from different parts of the world, and by people who were really rooted in those realities in a way that anybody who is a displaced thinking person, a displaced academic or displaced public intellectual, there's always a question when you come back to the situation of what used to be your homeland, of the extent to which you have a right to speak about it. So what we were trying to get at here is not some systematic deconstruction of a monolithic discourse, not at all, but simply to have not just the viewpoints, but also the emotions and the likes and dislikes of people in a whole bunch of countries around the world represented. And very often you'll see from those chapters that they all start out by saying one of the things that we very strongly object to is that certain values or certain ideas be labeled as purely Western, and we're not being allowed to use them here. So that's more or less how it is played out.
Any other comments on that point? You had a question for other members of the panel?
I wanted to ask Stuart, mainly because I'm not up to scratch on this, but how is the National Cultural Policy Project in Australia that's going on at the moment dealing with the question of city cultures and the kind of economy of qualities that goes on up and down the East Coast around the competition between cities and the tourist markets? I mean, how are they addressing city cultures?
That's a really good question, because the short answer is not at all. And that's not a glib thing. It actually goes back to a very strong question that Helmut and Raj start this volume with one of the assumptions that's made is that national actors are declining in significance over against city regions and super regions, etc. That's a contestable proposition. And I actually contested in my chapter. I don't think that the national has ceased being a major actor around culture at all, and certainly the national cultural policy, such as it is dealing very little with those questions. Partly that's simply a jurisdictional matter, because so much that has to go on and does go on at the city level is a matter for states and local authorities. And of course the relation, the endless relation in a federation between the national and other levels of governance, is being played out with, various bits of rhetoric around the need to connect better. But I don't think that's been a major feature of what the minister's trying to achieve. Certainly, his emphasis is much more on regions than on cities, for instance. It's much more on the opportunities for the national broadband network to provide equity of cultural access and participation and development for the regions of Australia. In fact, he's called the NBN the biggest piece of cultural infrastructure yet to be built in this country. So, it's quite a sharp distinction between the sort of emphases that we've been placing on the city and the city region and what is developing as a national cultural policy.
But I would see that as a failure, because it seems to me that one of the crucial dynamics that's going on in terms of cultural consumption and cultural markets is the intensification of branding, like it's going on in every other area of daily life. I'm looking at it in relationship to water, but you can see it in relationship to cities, so that so much of people's cultural consumption now, particularly in Australia, is driven by city-branded events. For example, the Vivid Festival that's currently badged as a Sydney-based event where you access the harbour in a completely different way with sound and light displays all over city buildings. So it seems to me that the ways in which cultural markets are organised now is the question of place branding and particular particularly city brandings, is becoming absolutely crucial to the economy of qualities in competitive, claims for consumers. So the nation just, to think that, struggling to assert that you would go and consume something because it was a national cultural event, I think is becoming much, much harder to market.
Yeah, you've emphasised a lot of the consumption side of things here, and they obviously are important. But consider the role, for instance, that a national cultural policy can play in Indigenous affairs. If there wasn't a major commitment at a national level to the advancement of Indigenous culture, where would it come from? There are all sorts of transversals here that are not capturable at the level of the local, at the level of the city. And I've given another example, which is the regions. We may, given that most of us live in metropolitan environments, we may not understand the degree to which that is a critical point in justice and equity in this country. I don't have any difficulty in any way in understanding what the contemporary city means in terms of culture, but I don't think it captures all the transversals that are going on as well.
I'm afraid that we're running out of time, so here's a quick word from
Well,
Raj and then we'll finish.
Well, yeah, it was just two things. The first is that definitely in the series, which was began to be thought about in 2003, 2004, we were far more inclined to side with the withering away of the nation-state thesis. And as the years have gone by, we've seen that that is obviously not what is happening. So Stuart's point is well taken. But there has nevertheless remained a certain amount of rhetoric in our presentation, particularly for prospective authors, that has tended to stay with that trope, stay with that construct, although we realize that it isn't as simple as that, and so that the new reality is different configurations of relationships. The local, the regional, and the national are relating to each other in different ways, and that's what we got to get a handle on.
Yeah.
That was the first thing. The second thing was that I think you've all seen how pleased I am to be here and how great I feel about this event, but I don't think I actually formally said thank you, Stuart, to you, to QUT, to the Centre of Excellence, and to all your colleagues. So I'll do that now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'd encourage two things. Please keep these conversations going, so if you want to keep talking to the panel, please grab them as they try to move and go into other things. Second thing, please buy the book on your way out. Third thing, the next faculty research seminar will be on the 15th of July. Professor Francois Heinderich, and we'll send you out more details about that early in July. So please join me in thanking Justin O'Connor, Raj Isar, Stuart Cunningham, and David.